What's up, everyone? Welcome back into another episode of Bills Talk with Matt Parrino and my co-host Ryan Talbot from nyupinsyracuse.com. And we are a couple days now away from the NFL draft. We've had a few days to let everything settle, let everything digest a little bit. And first and foremost, Ryan, feeling rested, feeling a little bit more energetic.
Yeah, a lot more rested than a few days ago for sure. I actually slept in until 9 a.m. A few days ago, which was probably the first time I've done that in at least a year. So pretty well rested over here.
So yeah, a big weekend for the draft and quarantine combined to let Super Ryan Talbot get some rest. He does a lot of work over at the site, and go over and check it out. I actually I dropped our grades, NYUp's full kind of report card slash fun superlatives on the draft. We have the best pick, under the radar potential pick, biggest impact pick, and puzzle pick. So go check that out at the site right now. That's fun. But we wanted to go live tonight for a quick podcast to talk about our 53-man roster projections that are going to be coming out tomorrow on the site. We're going to give everybody a little sneak peek of that here on Facebook and publish the podcast with the story tomorrow. And we're just going to run through each position group a little bit here and talk about some of the guys that we cut, some of the guys that we think might stick on the practice squad. But before we get to that, Ryan, and you had a little conversation with Joe Biscaglia on social media tonight about his that he put out. This was a tough exercise. There's a lot more talent on this roster all of a sudden.
Yeah, I was just going to say it's a good problem to have. 2017, Sean McDermott comes along, Brendan Bean joins after the draft. You could pretty much fire up that 53-man roster projection and feel pretty comfortable about most of it just because the depth wasn't necessarily there yet. You could kind of fill in the starting spots, and you had a pretty good feel. This year, fast forward now to 2020, it is a hard exercise to do. I probably went back and changed up my roster 4 or 5 times, just like, well, I can't put that person on the list and not this person. And then you're trying to juggle. You can't have this many at this position. So it's going to be a good problem to have, but there's going to be some really talented players that get let go by the Bills this year.
Definitely. And we'll get this thing rolling right off the bat. And it's an interesting conversation to be had because at the quarterback position, the Bills currently have 4 on the roster. Josh Allen, obviously, the set in stone starter. Matt Barkley, who's been the backup. Davis Webb, who spent last season on the practice squad, and somebody who, from things I've heard, is really well liked in the building. He brings a kind of a coach mindset to the room, really smart. He's seen a lot of systems. And then the 5th round draft pick from over the weekend, Jake Fromm out of Georgia. And so both of us actually agree here that we think to start the season, Josh Allen, Matt Barkley, and Jake Fromm will be on the active roster. Tell us why.
Jake Fromm is a 5th round pick. He was brought on for a reason to eventually contend for the backup job. And unfortunately, with this shortened offseason, because it's going to be shortened one way or the other, I don't think there's going to be enough time for him to prove that he is absolutely positively the best option to be the backup to Josh Allen. So I think you're going to have to carry 3 quarterbacks on this roster, which isn't ideal. You want to save those spots for a position, an extra wide receiver or an extra defensive lineman most years. But with the way the draft worked this year, I don't see a scenario where you're going to drop Matt Barkley for Jake Fromm. I don't see a scenario where you're going to drop Jake Fromm and try to get him on your practice squad. I know he lasted until the 5th round, but I feel like there would be another team that would try to come in and swoop and take him if the Bills did part ways with him.
Yeah, I think that the idea that Jake Fromm can be the long-term backup option here is a respectable one. I think it's one that makes a lot of sense. I think that the Bills probably don't pick him if they don't think that he can fill a role for them long-term, because we know how Brandon Beane values draft picks. And so this wasn't just a shot in the dark without, obviously they didn't go into the day planning to take a quarterback, but once you call out that person's name, there had to be a bit of a discussion going on as that pick approached, with Fromm still sticking out on the board. So I think that Brandon Beane went down to Georgia, took in a practice, watched him in person, and so I think he has a good feel of who he is as a player. But even with all that, and a leader, with all that said, 2020 is an important year for this team. And, Josh Allen, if he gets hurt, you know what I mean? He plays an aggressive style of football. What are you more comfortable handing the reins over to? Is it Matt Barkley, who, while limited in terms of what he can do as a passer, has been in this system for almost 2 years, has a familiarity with Brian Day and Ken Dorsey, and knows the offense and knows the weapons? Can Jake Fromm get up to speed quick enough to where you're at least at a place at some point this season where you're okay moving on from Barkley? Do you see it?
At some point this season, absolutely. At the start of the season, I don't see that scenario. It's just too hard for me to envision. Like you said, Matt Barkley knows the ins and outs of this playbook. If something happened to Josh Allen early in the season, and this is a guy that runs and takes off with the ball and doesn't run out of bounds, he takes those hits on, I would not feel comfortable with Fromm coming in now mid-season, late in the season, if he has a better grasp of the playbook and you've seen enough from him in practice. Absolutely. Maybe then you kind of pull the trigger on that move. It might happen in season, but I don't see that happening before the start of the season.
Mm-hmm. It's a good problem to have all of a sudden. I mean, I think fans were a little bit not enthused, I think is the best way to put it, about the quarterback situation before this draft. And now there's at least more options. And I think that you can get to a place where, even if you have to carry 3 quarterbacks, I think that you're okay. And also, if you do move out from Matt Barkley, who's to say that anybody picks him up? Who's to say that he might not be available there in the situation where you go with Fromm at some point? Barkley moves on, Allen gets hurt, and you bring Barkley back into the mix. Maybe. I mean, I think there's so many different ways you can go with this quarterback room, and that's what Brandon Beane's done. And we'll go throughout this roster, and we'll see some of the options that he's given himself. And next up, we'll go to the running backs, because right out of the chute, we're hitting them with 2 nice conversation points. We're in agreement. Devin Singletary and Zach Moss, the new 1-2 punch of this offense. TJ Yeldon is going to be that third running back, potentially in the mix at some point, but probably more so if Zach Moss isn't ready to go, but probably more so that depth piece if somebody gets hurt. Daquan Johnson is back to fill the special teams role that Sonoris Perry took over last year when Daquan Johnson went to Houston for a season. And then it gets fun. Patrick Demarco, current starting fullback. I have him making the 53-man roster. Who do you have making it, and why?
I have Reggie Gilliam. There's the name to watch, Bills Mafia. I'm calling my shot now, April 28th. All right, here's my reasoning. Patrick DeMarco, he's going to turn 31 in 2 days. Happy early birthday, Patrick. And what is he here for? He's not here for the offense, yet we still see him catch like 1 ball a game or get targeted 1 ball a game. He's here for special teams, right? I think it's they already added Tyler Matakevich in free agency. There's a big free agent signing. They brought back running back Daquan Johnson. And what does Reggie Gilliam do best? Special teams. 6 block kicks in 2 seasons at Toledo. A guy that can play fullback. He was at one point kind of a tight end of sorts. So you could probably actually use him as a pass catcher, and you could probably do a lot more than DeMarco, where DeMarco stands near the sidelines across from Josh, and Josh throws that pass that is either incomplete or goes for about a 2-yard gain. Maybe Gilliam can actually do something with that. But Gilliam, I was saying today, is my favorite under the radar undrafted free agent signing. I think that he has a legit shot of making this roster. Buffalo is going to meet with him before the COVID-19 outbreak. Now, I don't know if that was supposed to be like a private workout, if they were coming up for his pro day, whatever the case may be, but that had to get canceled. So there was some interest pre-draft in this prospect. I really think he has a shot to unseat Patrick DeMarco. As good as DeMarco's been, eventually you kind of have to rip the Band-Aid off with some of these veterans, and a 31-year-old fullback, that might be the time to part ways.
I love your line of thinking here, so much so that you got me teetering. You got me wanting to maybe change my pick a little bit here, but I'm going to stay with DeMarco right now until I'm able to kind of see this thing in camp. And listen, this is way too early. I mean, that's going to be in the headline tomorrow. The draft just happened. There's still some pieces that can be moved around here, but I think that Patrick DeMarco is an underappreciated part of this culture. You know what I mean? I think that, guys like Lorenzo Alexander, Kyle Williams before this. I think Patrick DeMarco belongs in that conversation with what he means in the room. And, it's tough because obviously the on-field contributions aren't this at the level of what he brings in the room and in terms of, being a leader of this team. But I still think that Sean McDermott has a great respect for that and a need for that in his locker room. He talks about guys that, he can trust to convey his message to players. And, how many people is Patrick DeMarco touching? I mean, he's in the line, he's in the running backs room, the tight ends room, the offensive line room, special teams, talking to all these different position groups. So I think that that's important. And I agree with Tyler Metakevich coming in here. If they feel that he can maybe take over the reins in a lot of that way from Patrick DeMarco, it makes sense. But I'll still stick with DeMarco for now. Wide receiver. But I love it, by the way. I love shaking it up. That's a name that, when you first sent it to me, I was like, wow, this is a cool thing to think about. Receiver, obviously, John Brown, Stephon Diggs on the outside, Cole Beasley. That's your starting lineup. That's your maybe the best trio in the AFC. And then from there, it gets interesting. We have obviously the two rookies, Gabriel Davis and Isaiah Hodgins, who were taken in the fourth and sixth round, respectively. Andre Roberts, we both still have as the kick returner, went to the Pro Bowl last year as a replacement. And then we both have Isaiah Mackenzie making this roster. And, let me start off with why I went Mackenzie, because this would be a nice area where I think you can go 6 receivers and be happy about it, because it'll allow you to keep another person on this roster. But what I like about Mackenzie is he's multi-faceted. He brings a lot of different things to the table. I think they're going to use Stephon Diggs in the jet sweep game this year, but I think that that's a role that Isaiah Mackenzie played pretty well last year. He gives you the option that if there is a receiver that goes down, he knows the offense. And I think of all, I put kind of him, Duke Williams, and Robert Foster in this one little bowl together. And what makes Isaiah kind of rise to the top of the bowl a little bit is that he's been in the offense, he's produced in the offense, and I just think that he has the mental makeup, and we'll talk about Duke Williams in a minute because I think he does too, to kind of fight through this summer and make the team.
Yeah, it was actually the other Isaiah that I almost had off the roster. It was Isaiah Hodgins that I had almost justified putting on there. Isaiah Mackenzie, like you said, has carved out a role with this offense. With the jet sweeps, he can come in sometimes, and when he was out there as a receiver and he was targeted and he caught the ball, he moved the chains a good amount of the time for the Bills. He's never going to get confused as a top receiver in this league, but he's been reliable. He knows the offense, like you said. However, it's going to be a tough competition. You have Duke Williams, you have Robert Foster, you have the rookies. Now, obviously, I think Gabriel Davis is a safe bet to make this team. But Isaiah Hodgins, I wouldn't go that far as to say that he's going to make this roster. He's a guy that maybe you could sneak onto your practice squad. But for the time being, I do have him making this 53-man roster. Looking it over, Matt and I both agreed on the receivers that were going to make this team. We both agreed Andre Roberts is going to stick around for at least another year as a kick returner. So that means that the following type of players are going to be out. You have Duke Williams, Robert Foster that are going to be out, Nick Easley, Ray McLeod. No big surprise on Easley and McLeod. McLeod's a guy, obviously, that they like enough that they've brought him back a few different times for the practice squad and things of that nature, but just not a guy that I see making that final cut. So wide receivers, I think you can kind of agree on the top 4, top 5, especially if you add in the fact that, especially when you factor in the returner in Andre Roberts, obviously. So there's some intrigue at the bottom in terms of Duke Williams, a fan favorite from last year, making it back on this roster again. A guy like Robert Foster, who Josh Allen thrived with when he was in his first season in 2018 at the end of the year, towards the end of the season. They had one of the highest he had one of the highest pass ratings in the league when targeting Foster, but Foster kind of disappeared last year with all that talent, all that depth.
So, yeah, before we get to tight ends, I just want to talk on Duke Williams for a moment because, I think Duke Williams, for as, at times hard as I've been on him for the performance in the playoff game where I thought, there was a couple plays that he left on the field, and don't get me wrong, John Brown left a couple plays on the field, Dawson Knox, Mitch Morris. I mean, you could go up and down that offensive lineup and figure out a play or two here or there where, a guy let down the team. So I don't want to put too much on Duke, but, when you get those kind of opportunities, you got to take advantage of them. And so I think that he's got the kind of makeup to go back to the drawing board, figure it out, and go into next season and really make a push. The problem is when you spend draft capital on receivers, big receivers, guys that are known for their hands, their reliability. And what did Sean McDermott say after the season, just after the season? We want to bring in guys that Josh Allen can trust. So now we're going to see if Gabe Davis and Isaiah Hodgins are those guys, but it's going to be fun. This is one of the most fun positions now all of a sudden. If you could just go back a year and look at where this position was a year ago, right before the start of free agency in 2019. We're talking about Zay Jones being, I think I put out an article then. Is Zay Jones going to be the number one receiver on this Bills team? And man, how the mighty have fallen since then. And so, it's a really fun position, and it's going to be fun to track that when camp finally arrives. But at tight end, who do we got?
Well, we had the same three. We obviously have Dawson Knox as our number one. I think we both agree a lot of athleticism there. A guy that could be a mismatched nightmare for this offense if he's utilized correctly. We have Ryan Croft as our second tight end, and then we have Tommy Sweeney. Tommy Sweeney is a guy that you and I both like a lot. Mm-hmm. And, not to give too much away in our article tomorrow, but I actually mentioned I wouldn't be shocked that if by the end or maybe mid-season next year, Sweeney overtakes that tight end 2 role. I think he's that good. I think he's a reliable blocker. I think he's a solid pass catcher. And when he was given opportunities as a rookie, I thought he really shined. That season finale early in the year in week 1, I think he actually put up a decent stat line. So he did well when he was given his moments.
Man, I'll tell you, I really liked that Pittsburgh game for Tyler Croft. And, finally, after how much he was plugging away at things, he finally, made a big play in a big moment, sent the Bills to the playoffs. But I agree with you in that I remember so many moments from last season from Tommy Sweeney. And I think that he showed so much just in year 1. He was thrown into the fire, man. I mean, Dawson Knox gets hurt early. Tyler Croft got hurt on the first day of OTAs. And there's Tommy Sweeney. Okay, we need you to be our starting tight end for the next couple of weeks. And he handled it so well. He looked really good in the first couple of weeks. I thought, he's really well-rounded, and he's going to make a significant jump from year 1 to year 2 based on, just the things he knows he has to get better at. So I'm totally with you. I think we finally see the end of the Jason Kroom story. Although I hope that he gets a full training camp and preseason, whatever that looks like. So he actually gets to play in some games. If you remember, he was hurt all in the lead up to the last preseason game. He got to play in that last one, and then obviously went back on the injured list. But, I just like to see him get a real crack at things, and it's going to be tough to move on from Lee Smith. But like we've talked about, I think Tommy Sweeney, Dawson Knox, Tyler Croft, you have a lot of talent there. And because you look up and down this roster, it's going to be tough to keep 4 tight ends unless you're willing to move. Or if you can't keep 4 tight ends and 3 quarterbacks with how deep this roster is.
I agree completely. And that's what, we talked about it with the quarterbacks. When you keep 3 quarterbacks, that takes away an extra tight end or an extra defensive lineman, because when we, again, not trying to get too far ahead of ourselves, offensive line and defensive line, so many tough decisions. And not that it wouldn't have been tough if there was one extra spot for the 2 areas, but with 3 quarterbacks, you have to make those tough decisions. You have to keep 3 tight ends. You can only keep so many offensive and defensive linemen. So, that's the price you pay when you have 3 quarterbacks on your roster.
We're going to go to the offensive line. We'll go quickly through this. It's basically the starting lineup from last year with Deion Dawkins, Cody Ford, Quentin Spain, John Feliciano, Mitch Morse. They're all there. Depth pieces, Ty Nsekhe, Darrell Williams, both can push for playing time as starters if they can stay healthy. Spencer Long is that backup guard, and then Ryan Bates, who can play guard, tackle, and center. We really like that 9. If you look down at the cuts, some of the guys that we have not making the list, Evan Boehm, who the Bills just signed from Miami, he's a cut. We differ on Garrett McGinn, who you believe will get cut, whereas I think he'll land on the practice squad as opposed to Ike Bucker, who you think will be on the practice squad. What made you think that?
Yeah, well, Bacher's this guy that they seem to really like. I mean, to the point where they kept him on that 53-man roster last season, where I can't remember personally ever having him on one of my 53-man projections. I thought he was going to be a tough cut, but I thought he was going to be a practice squad guy last year. And instead, he makes this roster. He didn't get a ton of playing time, obviously, because the starting offensive line was pretty healthy all season, first and foremost. But now, especially with a guy like Darrell Williams on this roster, and you still have all that those players that bring that additional versatility. I don't see a spot for him on the 53-man roster, but I think they value him enough that they're going to try to get him on the practice squad. Now, they tried that a few years ago. Kansas City claimed him for a short period of time before they let him go. So it's no guarantee, but if I were to choose between those two, I think Bacher's in my opinion, would be more realistic at practice squad. But they also like McGinn enough that they brought him back to see what he could do. Boehm, Bacher, both of them were tough cuts, though, because, I kind of want to see what they can do before we obviously get closer to the season to make our final projections. But I think they're both in play still for this roster when all is said and done.
Yeah, you have Trey Adams landing on the practice squad. I have him actually being cut. And again, it's really tough to do this right now. We haven't gotten a chance to really look at Trey Adams, and he's a guy that, for I think it was, 2 rounds, he was hovering around the best available players left on the draft board, and he obviously slid, and the Bills signed him as an undrafted free agent. The talent is there. There's no question about that. It's, can he stay healthy? And we'll get a really good look at him, hopefully, in the summertime. But what do you think? John mentions, do you think he'll make the team? What do you think his chances are? Because I do think the depth at tackle, all of a sudden, I think it depends on what they're going to do with Cody Ford. If Cody Ford truly is going to get moved inside to guard, I think that completely shakes up everything. If Cody Ford starts at tackle and Deion Dawkins starts at tackle, there's 2 tackle spots. And is Trey Adams going to beat out Darrell Williams and Ty Nsekhe? I'm not sure. Now you got to remember Ryan Bates, who's been in the system now for a year as well. So interesting stuff. Where do you land?
Of those offensive tackles that you mentioned, the only one that maybe you could make a case for him beating out, and I'm not saying it from a talent perspective, but you have to kind of look at the age of these players. Maybe in Nsekhe, kind of you part ways with him because he's up there in age. Now, he was being praised as a great signing last year. When he was on the field, I thought he actually played very well. But you've mentioned he seemed to always be in pain or be hurt. He was always covered in those ice packs and so on and so forth. So maybe at some point, if you feel good about your overall depth, let's just say that they like Ford as their starter at right tackle. They feel comfortable with Darrell Williams maybe as the backup there, or Bates. Then, you could kind of stash Adams on that roster, bring him along slowly. Now, the other scenario with Adams, someone kind of said to me on Twitter today, could they do what they did with Vashawn Joseph, where they kind of put him on the injured reserve out of the blue? And I'm not saying there wasn't an injury to Vashawn Joseph, because there was. But if Adams gets dinged up, and he has that history of injuries, obviously, and they like enough out of what they see from him in that limited time, that's absolutely something they could do. A sneaky move where you keep him on your roster, you kind of get him in the system for a year. He gets some time to kind of learn the playbook, build up some strength. Like you said, the talent's there. It's just, can this guy stay healthy? Bulging disc, torn ACL. Sophomore year, there were people talking about this guy as potential first-round pick or a lock, at least for the second round. So can he return to form? Maybe, but we've also seen those players that they've had the injury history at the college level, and it just didn't get any better at the pros either. So he's a guy to watch, but I'm not going to say that he's going to make this roster at this time.
Right. And, obviously, Bates is, I put him in here, and I'm starting to, we're really starting to think about all the options here. And yeah, I could see a scenario where Trey Adams completely outplays Ryan Bates in the preseason and earns himself a roster spot. And it's not out of the realm of possibility. But I want to see it before I'm willing to, because I saw Ryan Bates come in and play last year and do what this regime really holds in high regard, and that is flash position flexibility and played at a high level at several spots. So he has that going for him heading into the year. So we'll see how that plays out. Let's flip over to the defensive side of the ball real quick. I think the defensive line is pretty much set. I think that there's you can make an argument that they could go 9 deep here. We have them going 8 deep, and we have them going with Jerry Hughes, Mario Addison as your likely starters on the edge. AJ Epinesa, the rookie second-round draft pick. Quentin Jefferson, free agent from Seattle. Defensive tackles, Star Latulele, Ed Oliver, Vernon Butler, and Harrison Phillips. And this could also change based on Harrison Phillips' health and where his availability level is at as we move towards the season. But that's the 8 we're going with. And if you notice, there's a name not on that list. Before I throw it over to you, I will say, like I mentioned, there is a real scenario that I could see play out where they go into this season with 9 defensive linemen. And part of the reason for that is Epinesa, Jefferson, but even Addison to a lesser degree have the ability to flip inside at times and play on the interior. I mean, you heard Brandon Beane say, some of the stuff that he liked out of Epinesa was the versatility and his ability to move inside to 3-tech. So I could see a scenario where Trent Murphy remains on this roster and they still have, this group, and maybe Harrison Phillips, they want to slow play his return. It'll be interesting to see, but as it stands right now, we have Trent Murphy being a cut.
Yeah, and that was a tough one. It really was. I know some people will scoff at that and say, oh, they're going to save all this money by doing it. But look at what he did at the end of the regular season. He had a great game against the Jets in the end. And yeah, it was a meaningless game, but he racked up a few sacks there. Fast forward to the playoff game against the Texans, 3 sacks, I believe, in that game off the top of my head. Was just all over the place and was making life difficult for Watson at times. So he ended the year really strong. But like you said, when you look at this roster, Addison was brought in for a reason. He is a guy that can get after the quarterback consistently. No fewer than 9 sacks over the last few years, 39 total over that time. Jerry Hughes is still Jerry Hughes. He's going to at least get those pressures. I think he's a guy that can still record a lot of sacks too, and I think it's going to be a lot better this year with that talent that you have on the interior and what you have opposite of him at the other defensive end spot. Epinesa obviously is a lock to make this roster. Quentin Jefferson is a guy that can flip inside, outside. He has that versatility. They brought Butler in, but like you said, it's going to come down to Harrison Phillips. Is he going to be ready to go? Is he going to go on the pup? Where's he going to be at the start of the season? Because if he's not ready to go, then yeah, you can make the case for keeping a Trent Murphy. Or if you are just set on parting ways with Murphy, you can bring a Daquan Johnson on this roster to start the year and then kind of move from there. Mike Love as well could be a possibility. It's going to be difficult, but this is what you and I have been talking about. When you build up your roster and you have this much talent, it's a good problem to have when you can part ways with a Trent Murphy and not blink an eye, and you can feel good about what you have. So would it hurt to a certain extent to get rid of Murphy? Sure. He ended up last season strong. Yes, he never really necessarily played up to that contract early on from what he was getting paid. But he was coming off of a pretty serious injury himself, and he was kind of returning to form, I thought, last season at the end of the year. So that's, like I said, a good problem to have. Murphy gets cut. You have all this talent, and again, a lot of guys that have that position versatility that can bring a lot to this defense.
Don't rule out also, Brandon Beane flipped Wyatt Teller and Russell Bodine right before the season last year for a 5th and 6th round pick. Who's to say that a team's, starting edge rusher goes down and they need some depth, that they want to just add Trent Murphy, who's going to on the last year of his deal and has some cap space. It makes a lot of sense to try to flip him for a 5th or even lower. Just, that's what Brandon Beane does so well. So don't rule that out as well. Bring him on through this whole process and then try to, move on while adding an asset. Let's go to the linebacker position. We got 3 left to go, and linebacker is interesting because there's a lot of unknowns. I think that what we do know is Tremaine Edmonds, Matt Milano, AJ Klein, locks to make the roster. Tyler Matakevich, like we mentioned, his special teams prowess, he's going to be on the roster, going to be on the 53. Then it gets interesting because Voshon Joseph was out all last year. Tyrell Dodson obviously had the off the field incident. The Bills kept him through that whole process. And so I think both of those guys are going to be fighting for a roster spot. And I think that their presence is why the Bills didn't address the linebacker position in the draft. And, really in free agency other than AJ Klein, because I don't think Matakevich, while he can be the backup interior middle linebacker, I don't think that you want to land in a situation where he's playing significant snaps. And it's interesting, talk about the position flexibility, and Brandon Beane bangs that drum. AJ Klein has experience playing in the inside as well. He can play middle linebacker. So I think that this position's tough to figure out. I have Mike Bell and Delshon Phillips getting cut. Both of us do. We both have Tyrell Dodson landing on the practice squad with Voshon Joseph making the roster.
Yeah, Dodson and Joseph were the two that I was kind of flipping back and forth. I think they like Corey Thompson and what he can do in terms of that depth role, special teams play, things of that nature. Matakevich, we both just said, has that special teams experience. Klein can play inside, outside. If something were to happen to Edmonds, he could kind of slip inside. So, they don't have to necessarily say we need depth position or a backup for this specific linebacker position, because there is some versatility there with Klein, with Thompson, and then what they end up doing with Dodson and Joseph. At the end of the day, I went with Joseph just because he was a draft pick from this regime. There was obviously something that they liked enough from him that they felt like he could be a player on this roster, a contributor on this roster. So time will tell there, but like you said, they obviously felt there's enough talent there that they didn't have to go linebacker, which, some people did think that was a sneaky need and something that they could have addressed sooner rather than later. Early on in the draft process, a lot of people had us targeting guys like Logan Wilson, whose draft stock obviously went up a little bit as the process went on. But there were linebackers added in a lot of these mock drafts just because people thought from the outside it was a sneaky need, but the team obviously disagreed with that.
Yeah, and this was tough for me as well. I really like Tyrell Dodson and his ability to play multiple spots. I think Voshon Joseph, I think he's more athletic and potentially more explosive, but I think Tyrell Dodson is kind of a headier player, somebody that, really kind of grasps things at a much quicker pace in the offseason last year. So it'll be interesting to watch that play out. At cornerback, we're almost on the same page. Tre'Davious White, Josh Norman, Levi Wallace, and then it gets interesting. And Taron Johnson, obviously, in the slot. Then it gets interesting because I think EJ Gaines won't end up making this roster. I think they'll go back to the model that was successful last year, where Josh Norman kind of funnels in for that Kevin Johnson role. They go with three cornerbacks, but have Saran and Taron, who they believe can both go to the outside. You think that they'll end up cutting Dean Marlowe and keeping EJ Gaines? Explain.
Yeah, it's just what you've seen from Gaines. Now, again, there's a big asterisk next to this. Can he stay healthy? History has said no, to be quite honest. But when he has been able to be on the field, he plays very well. He showed how well he fit into this defense in 2017 when he played 11 games or started 11 games, then went 8-3. He proved to be a valuable contributor to this defense. And at worst, I think that the Bills would feel it would be nice to have him there as a depth piece behind Wallace, behind Norman, another guy that you can kind of rotate in there. Maybe, and who knows what they have in mind for one of those guys. Maybe they want to try one of them on the inside too. I don't necessarily think that, but I just think that Gaines, from a talent perspective, if he's healthy, he's one of the top 53. Now, again, time will tell if he stays healthy there. And then my reasoning for Marlowe is just so much at safety. Obviously, you have that 1-2 punch with Hyde and Poyer. Saran Neal, obviously, he was used at times as that big nickel, but he really carved out a role on special teams last year. I thought he was kind of the MVP of the special teams unit last year. And then Daquan Johnson, there's a lot of upside there. So in my mind, I said, okay, Marlowe, they like him. They re-signed him. He has experience going back to the Carolina days. But it's, again, one of those tough decisions that had to be made if everyone stays healthy. And I just kind of said, okay, there's more question marks in my mind at the cornerback position than there is at safety. So I'd rather keep on that extra player at that cornerback position.
Mm-hmm. I think Marlowe is going to take over the Kurt Coleman role. I think that he's going to. They like the. I think that's why they brought him back, and obviously they're getting pretty set with their safety room, and I think they trust Dean not only to, play some big nickel, but also be that number one veteran presence if anything happens to Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer. I think Daquan Johnson is a great young player, very exciting, ton of upside. But if one of those guys get hurt, are you willing to kind of roll the dice with Daquan Johnson? If somehow Daquan Johnson gets hurt, then it's Saran Neal, who hasn't really played safety in over a season. So I think that was my reasoning there. It'll be interesting to see how that position plays out. Let's go to the special teams before we get out of here. We both had Kari Vedvik making it as the punter after lackluster year for Corey Bojorquez. I still don't think he was as bad as I think a lot of people thought he was. It's tough to punt in Buffalo, but I think an upgrade should be something that they can get maybe in Vedvik. We'll see. Reed Ferguson, we both have making the team. And then we'll close this thing out with a bang. I still want to get to a couple of cut guys before we get out of here. But I got Steven Hauschka, the veteran, the savvy veteran, hanging on to his spot and beating out Tyler Bass at the kicker spot. But you have Bass making the roster. What's your thinking there?
Well, first, let me say, I was trying to come up with a scenario where you keep both kickers on, and then I said 3 quarterbacks, 2 kickers. I would absolutely hate that roster.
That'd be throwback to like 1985 or something.
Yeah. So I just couldn't, I couldn't justify it. And then at the end of the day, I look at Bass, and yes, he's a kicker, and yes, he's a rookie, but he was the number 1 kicker on a lot of draft boards.
Right.
He wasn't the first kicker taken in the draft. I know the Patriots took a kicker, and there's some controversy there. But Bass was overall this guy that was number 1 on most boards. He has the big leg. He's a guy that, it's hard to trust a rookie coming in. There was a time last season where I thought the Bills were going to part ways with Hauschka, or at least consider it when they tried to put in a claim on, I'm blanking on names tonight. He was on the roster at the start of the season, ended up signing elsewhere.
Schmidt. No,
I can picture him too.
Yes, he went to the Chargers.
Chase McLaughlin.
Chase
there
McLaughlin.
it is.
There you go.
So, when they tried claiming him and bringing him in, I thought, okay, that could have been the end of Hauschka there. Now, Hauschka, to his credit, rebounded nicely after that. He was actually pretty accurate after that point. And in the playoffs, he made every kick. Mm-hmm. But the distance is starting to go. And you kind of have to sit there and say, okay, Hauschka has been pretty reliable, but the distance is gone. There's going to be at least 1 or 2 games where it might come down to a field goal, and it's going to be, do I feel comfortable enough that Hauschka can make a long kick, or do I feel comfortable enough in a rookie that can make a shorter kick? It's a tough decision because a rookie can get thrown off his game very easily. We've seen some high picks at the kicker position struggle and be out of the league earlier than a lot of people anticipated in Tampa Bay, especially a few seasons ago. So it was one of those things that I went back and forth on. But again, same thing as the fullback position. I said, eventually you have to pull that Band-Aid off. You have to move on. And I think there's no time like the present to move on from Hauschka. I don't think Bass is a guy that you can sneak onto your practice squad. I think some other team would try to claim him because there's going to be a lot of teams that go through kicker issues this season, whether it's a shortened preseason, whether it's at training camp. They're not going to like what they see. And if the number 1 kicker from the draft is sitting out there and available, I think another team's going to try to poach him.
Definitely. And I think this is another one that maybe you have me teetering once again. I think it's a serious problem if you're going into this season and you have to rule out kicking field goals past 55 yards because you can't trust your kicker to get it there. And this guy, Tyler Bass, is out there posting videos on social media where he's standing on one leg and kicking 50-yarders like it's nothing. So, yeah, I think I really want to see how it plays out in the preseason. Hauschka's been so good for so long, but it may be time to move in that direction. So that'd be fun. Before we get out of here, a couple of these decisions, I have the Bills cutting Trey Adams, keeping Davis Webb, and also cutting Robert Foster. Those were my, those were the three that I was kind of toying around with at the end of this list. And Foster, I just think I'm not confident in him having the ability to bounce back, not only from a lackluster year two, where granted the opportunities maybe weren't there, but when there were opportunities, he really didn't do anything with them, but also to sit there and watch all offseason as the Bills add Stephon Diggs, draft two other guys. And now you're coming in here, and not only do you have all of these other players, but oh yeah, by the way, Duke Williams outperformed you last year in the opportunities that he got. So I think that Robert Foster is going to be a guy that they cut. I think they like Nick Easley as a potential slot backup, safe bet in case anything happens to Cole Beasley. They really liked him in camp last year. I thought he was good. I don't know if he has that kind of ability, but I just think that Robert Foster's time will be done. What did you have here at the end in terms of cuts?
Yeah, so we tried to put together a practice squad. I actually had Foster and Duke Williams on that. I actually now you have me swaying a little bit about Easley, because the one thing about Easley before I even saw him play is he was hyped up as is creating separation in the slot.
Mm-hmm.
So to have him come on and be like that backup for Cole Beasley, someone that you can have waiting in the wings if something happens, it makes a lot of sense. Now, maybe you kick a Hodgins on the inside, a big wide receiver, a much different type of slot. But there's been some discussion of that possibly being in play there. But it's not bad to have someone that fits that mold of Beasley waiting in the wings, especially because Beasley's getting up there in age too. Beasley's roster spot is obviously 100% safe. Don't get me wrong. But it's nice to have that in case there's an injury that you could bring someone in that would have a year plus of knowledge of the playbook, which is something that's going to be important at this time of the year with this shortened off season, to be waiting in the wings. So I'm actually interested to see if Easley can kind of stick on that practice squad.
Great stuff, my man. This was fun. We went 45 minutes. I thought this was going to be a nice little 20-minute quickie, but that's okay. We will be back tomorrow night at 7 p.m. for our live weekly show, Bills Talk Live Wednesday. We are going to have special guests. Channel 4 WIVB sports director Josh Reed will join us for the first 30 to 40. And then we'll have Nate Geary, WGR 550 talk show host, the host of pregame and postgame, the Bill before and after the Bills game. So it is going to be a packed show tomorrow. We're so excited. Make sure you find us on all of your podcast platforms. Search Buffalo Bills Talk with Matt Parrino. It's Matt Parrino and Ryan Talbot. We made this on the fly, so we're kind of trying to
no worries.
get with it here. But no, we're really rocking and rolling. We really like these live shows. We didn't really do questions today, but tomorrow, bring your questions. We will talk about anything that you want. We'll react to the draft, talk a little bit about this and more with Josh Reed and Nate Geary. For Ryan Talbot, I'm Matt Parrino. Keep it locked on to NYUpInSyracuse.com for all your Bills content.